Greetings. Well, welcome everyone. We'll start with Anne and Maura. I'm Carla. This is Jason, and this is Whitney. And we're here to talk about American history, History 260. Jason, can you get us started just talking about how you came to your vision of this course, how you found people to work with, all these people from different organizations? How did it all start?
Yeah, I was interested. I'm a fairly new faculty member here on campus, and so this was the first time that I was introducing a large course on campus here. And so my initial contact was with CRLT, and I participated in a large course initiative workshop in which we spent multiple weeks working on different concepts around pedagogy, around GSIs, and assessments. So that was my initial contact, was trying to rethink the course through this LCI grant that I'd received. And from there, we started to open up for other opportunities and to try to think about how to do a course, which is typically a lecture course, and undo it in some ways that might be interesting for students, for GSIs, and for me as the instructor.
Excellent. So I thought we would take a look. There's really three primary assignments in the course. So I thought we would start off with the first one, which you called Annotating American History. And one of the learning objectives for it, which I really liked, was annotation is a key research and analytical skill that provides a way of talking back to the text as you read. You talk about slowing down. So just in general, the learning objectives for the course, what you had in mind, how the assignment came to be structured the way it was, lessons learned. We can just have a kind of a general conversation about that particular assignment.
Yeah, I'll say for me, part of the goal in the course was it was twofold. First, to give a sense to students about what historians actually do, outside of memorizing dates and events and times, to think about history making as a process and to allow the students to participate in that process. And the kind of other part of that is to think about how the skills that you get in a history class are easily transferable to other kinds of endeavors, other kinds of professions, that no matter what the students will be doing professionally, having to handle large amounts of information and analyze and critique it and speak back to that document or to that material is something that people will be doing regardless. And so I want it to match the kinds of things that I'm used to doing as an historian to just generalized skills that students will be able to take with them. From there, that really was an open question about how to do that.
Yeah.
The process of actually getting to the learning objectives and the assignment itself was just hugely collaborative, and it involved CRLT and the libraries and instructional technologies. It went all around the campus, in fact. So the final product was really the product of that collaboration.
One of the things I was curious about was, so there's typically two different kinds of support, right? Support for students and then support for you as an instructor. And so that was really where that came in terms of sketching out the assignment. Did you feel like you got support in terms of assessing the assignment?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the biggest benefits to me, this may not sound like a benefit initially, was that I'm very new to the university, and so I didn't know what I didn't know. That turned out to be a really big bonus, because as I was talking to people at CRLT, they were able to connect me with people in the libraries and on and on. And so not actually knowing what the next step was turned out to really help me. It got me in contact with a lot of incredible resources on campus. And we talked about the assignments really from soup to nuts. We talked about the description of the assignment and how the description could work and what might be more beneficial in describing the assignment and the learning objectives, how to structure the assignment, and then also about assessments. All of that was a part of the conversation that we were having,
One thing I noticed in terms of student support was that you provided links directly to Social Explorer, which is like a really easy way. And that tells me then that that's worked for you guys in the past in terms of giving how-to information without having to reinvent the wheel and produce a lot of specialized information.
Maura, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we just made a course guide using library software that we subscribe to that to sort of just highlight the main resources students would need for the assignments. So Social Explorer is one thing, 18th century collections, which is what they used for the annotation project.
Okay.
And some sort of basic background information type resources, encyclopedias of like the 18th century and things like that. The library website can be a little difficult to navigate, especially for first and second year undergraduate students. It's really overwhelming. I find it overwhelming. So this was just meant to sort of put all of those things in one place that could then live in Canvas and be easily accessible for them. And it also had our contact information for students if they had questions about anything. A couple got in touch with me, not a ton. But
So did they reach out via email or did they visit locations? Or?
usually email, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kinds of questions? Doesn't sound like you got too many.
Not a ton. You know, I have a question. What did gender in the 18th century look like? So, pointing them to something like an encyclopedia entry, because they didn't need to do like a ton of background research for most of these projects, which is appropriate really for like a 200 level course. But they did need some background information to understand the text that they were annotating.
Got it. And I have a copy of the assignment information here, and it looks like there were pretty detailed instructions, but not overwhelming. There are a couple of bullet points here, but so enough structure, but not so much structure. And I looked at it. It's a beautiful overview. It's like this nice curated list of information sources. So it was not overwhelming, but it was enough.
Yeah, I think your Eat, Pray, Love was like it was like a really nice way of getting them to look at interesting things, right? Like about food in the 18th century. But again, like providing enough structure so that they weren't just sort of flailing around in the database, which has thousands upon thousands of books from the 18th century. But yeah, having those thematics for them to work on, I think, was a really good way of doing it.
Yeah, another part of that project in particular, and really with all three of them, one of the key parts of the success was that we really worked in partnership to the point that we devoted at least one class period, one of the lecture periods, I made open and available to librarians or whoever might be the subject expert on that particular topic, to have the entire day if they needed it, to come in, introduce the assignment, introduce the technology, allow the students to play with the material in a kind of low stakes manner, and giving over a couple of lecture sessions in a semester. It's not a small thing, but it turned out to be an incredibly important thing that the students were seeing the experts in the library as real experts in the field, and they recognize this as a collaborative effort.
Nice. So you came to the lecture sections, not to discussion sections. You addressed the full group.
Yeah, I came to one for the annotation project. We both taught Social Explorer, and then the librarians from Special Collections, I think, actually had several sessions with the class, because their work is very hands-on in a different way, right?
Right. Let's talk about the second assignment, exhibiting American history, and the learning objectives for this one. You had these key words as part of the text for it: public historians and museum professionals. Content curation is a key skill, and then you just laid it out for them: find, filter, grade, synthesize, contribute, signpost. And again, I just wanted to do the assignment myself. It's like, so really skillfully using learning objectives to provide a framework, but also to using language that was very simple and yet evocative. I thought it was just really, really nicely done. Do you want to talk about, in this one, you gave them a timetable, I noticed, for this one.
That's right, yeah.
So kind of some key milestones to help them pace themselves. Any other comments on this one?
I have to say that assignment is the one that surprised me the most. So in that one, students were choosing an historical document and then thinking about how you would exhibit that document, whether it was an old book or antique broadside or a map or, And so they had options. And this is all of the kind of dusty, archival kind of material that for historians, for historians, there's a kind of, frankly, a kind of fetish of old and antique items. And so we get really excited about that kind of material. The strange thing, and I was genuinely surprised, is that the students got really excited about that. So they had one session where they were able to just scan the material that was available, and then they chose which item they wanted to work on at a later time. And they were logging in right when the material was available, as if it were like concert tickets or, something, because they wanted to get their item. They were really eager to.
They had their hearts set on.
That's right.
That's
and so
great.
they got really excited and about the material. That part really did surprise me.
Wow.
They cared. They were already invested in their historical artifact, even before they started the project, really. So.
Do you have any idea what, I know that's like if we could bottle it, it would be terrific, but do you really have any idea what was it? Was it the assignment structure, or was it, what do you think caused that connection?
I think part of it is the expertise in special collections, that they did a kind of pre-curation, right? They collected materials that were going to inspire students in a way. I think they know what they're doing. So when the students came in and looked at the artifacts, they were already looking at things that were going to get a response, and they did. They got a response.
So once again, enough to get them excited, but not so much that it was overwhelming, and maybe choosing pieces that they thought would do a good job of conveying why historians get excited about a dusty thing, right? Old, right?
Yeah.
What are the things that are going to really show that? That's great. Did you?
Can I add something there, Carla?
bet.
I think there's something too interesting about the way that you invited students to be experts, though, right?
Yeah.
So that they got this sort of curated list of items, but that you really, and we talk about that in CRLT, is kind of leveraging student motivation. So what are the ways that you invite students into conversation with you as co-producers of knowledge rather than just as recipients?
Yeah.
And I think you just did a really wonderful job, and obviously in collaboration to invite students into conversation as producers of information rather than just recipients of your expertise. So I think that is likely also a reason why students would get really excited, and to get to work with a thing that perhaps only a handful of other people had ever had an opportunity to work with or think about or look at. So
I really have to give Jason a lot of credit for just opening up his classroom and giving special collections a month with the students, right? Because special collections, I mean, they curated the text, but then they also came in every week and saw the students in their sections.
That's right.
And spent a good deal of time with them talking about selecting materials, how you write exhibit labels, what an exhibit is. And things to look at when you're looking at a primary text. So it wasn't just the text on the page, but looking at the binding and the paper and all of these things that I don't think students were at all asked to do before they entered this class.
Yeah, even the thing about writing labels is it's something that is, it's a genre of writing that is incredibly important, but also very invisible. The expertise behind label writing can be really invisible. You walk through a museum or you see an exhibit and you just take that written material as if it simply goes with the material, but there's a lot of intellectual work that goes into that space, and the students recognize that it was difficult to write the labels in a way that fully explained and explored the richness of the material that they had adopted. They wanted to write pages and pages, but you can't write pages and pages in a label like that. So they even came to some understanding of kind of genre writing and how it differs according to what your needs are.
Is the exhibit available online?
It is. It actually is available.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's on the library online exhibits page. So it's part of the library's curated exhibits. So the library will actually maintain it until we move on to another platform. But it is part of the official library exhibits.
I will have to look.
So for the last assignment, mapping American history, this one was where in the assignment prompt you talked about the valuable skill of visualizing data as a research skill. Can you talk a little bit about this assignment?
Yeah, this one was an interesting one because this was the assignment that the students hated. They hated this one, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So it's completely indispensable. So We started this just talking about how much of the information that they receive comes through data visualization. This happens on social media, it happens in major newspapers. That kind of mapping is just a part of how we understand information. And because data visualization is so sexy and attractive, the information itself can be really convincing, whether or not the information is workable or valid or vetted in any kind of way. And so I just wanted them to get their hands on what it means to produce some material like that. So the reason why they didn't like it is actually not for the reason that I expected. I thought they were going to have trouble with the technology. And they did. They bumped into the technology a bit, but the thing that they didn't like was the fact that the technology that they were using was based on U.S. Census data, and U.S. Census data is really unstable. Like, they're unstable markers for racial identification, so students wanted to be able to talk about, say, African American history, the change of African American history over time. It's difficult to do when the terms for race are changing with every census. So it's hard to trace African American identity back in a way that's kind of simple and transparent. You have to actually think through that stuff. Place names change, geographies change, and you have to think about that as you're creating this data. And so they recognized that their data was invalid. Like they saw the holes in it. They actually saw the holes in it, and that they were having to make decisions that were really choices about privileging one kind of interpretation of information over another. They did not like that, which is exactly the point.
Yes.
That was the point of the assignment, is that this stuff is really unstable, and the kind of data visualizations that you see on Facebook or Twitter or wherever else, that they are as unstable. But it took them to kind of get their hands into that material to do it, and they really did not like it. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Can one of you talk a little bit about the workflow, like what in terms of interacting with the technology tool? What was that like, just at a really high level?
So, I mean, Maura and I came in and did the instruction for that. Maura did most of it. But the instruction itself seemed to go fairly smoothly, because there are like tutorials, so it was really just a quick introduction, and then we let the students play.
Because it is a platform that's designed to make working with the historical census data easy, and it is on its surface easy, but all of the underlying issues.
So it was when they got into their own projects
That's right.
that they I see.
And the product has like documentation about how the categories change and things like that. So pointing that stuff out so that they knew it was there, but it is designed to make doing a map super easy, but not to make the underlying issues invisible, which is nice.
Interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and we've touched on it a little bit, the student experience. I'm particularly curious about what you think their expectations were coming in, and whether you had to adjust any of those expectations, and just how it sounds like on some of the assignments they were just very excited, and maybe not so excited about some aspects of others. but can you just talk a little bit about what, I'm pretty sure they may not have expected some of these more unusual aspects of this course, or these kind of innovative assignments.
I will say one thing about the last assignment, about their kind of sense of not liking the assignment. One of the things that I think mitigates against that is to allow students to live in that frustration and have difficulty, but assure them that it's low stakes, that the outcomes are low stakes, that your grade isn't dependent on whether or not you can solve the problems of the U.S. Census data.
Interesting.
That's not what we're here to do. The process is actually, that is actually the assessment. You're going through the process is the assessment. So there were moments in each of the projects where the students were feeling themselves on shaky ground. In the first assignment, for example, they were interacting with a huge database of millions and millions of pages of 18th century material and data, and some of them had trouble just conceptualizing search words that would get them to material that they needed or wanted. And so even that was a trick for them to start thinking about what search words do and what they mean. And so in terms of expectations, I think it did shift. The students were expecting to come into a large course, to listen to lectures, to go to recitations and have the lectures summarized for them, and then to regurgitate information. When they found out that that wasn't the structure of the course, then they got really excited. So
great.
They were actually happy about what you were talking about, Whitney, about this idea that they were experts and they were creating information. They actually bought into that. And in the exhibiting American history example, we talked about their position as authors and as owners of this material, that they've created something that can go on a CV and that they've done this thing and it has a kind of outcome. And they bought into that completely.
That's really exciting.
They were all over that idea that they had written something, they had produced something.
They had contributed.
That's right. Yeah.
How about your GSIs?
Yeah, that was one of the parts of the class that it's not on the learning outcomes, the front-facing learning outcomes for the students, but one of the troubles with many large lecture courses is that the instructor gives the lecture and then the students expect to either have the lecture taught to them again in the recitation or have it summarized for them. And so in that case, I feel like the problem is that GSIs actually have content expertise and they have field specializations that aren't mobilized if they're just summarizing a lecture. And so the idea was to actually mobilize GSIs in a way and to emphasize some of their strengths so that they were working primarily as mediators of these projects, right? Yeah. So they were doing much less of the kind of content summarization, summary that you would expect in a class like this, and instead we're actually demonstrating their own expertise of U.S. Census data information or how to navigate online databases. That's exactly what they're learning to do. So they were able to be experts in their recitations in a way that the students are able to take ownership over the project too.
That's great. They did all the assessing, right?
They did all the assessing. Okay. Yeah, they did all the assessing. Yeah.
Were they? How did they feel about that? What was that like from your sense?
It's the same thing. So to the extent that you provide frameworks for the students, you provide framework for the GSIs. And for me in particular with these projects, the goal was to have it as low stakes as possible, and students who participate in the process and are doing it in good faith were fine in the assessment. That's really all we were trying to measure. It's whether or not the students had kind of worked in good faith with the assignment.
And were students, did they display, or did they express curiosity about how they would be graded on some of these things? And
as always,
I had the feeling that you would say that. Yeah. So they were kind of exploring, wanting the parameters.
They did, and I think that unfortunately, they mapped their level of anxiety with the assignment with their concern about the assessment and the outcome. And so if they felt that they were having difficulty kind of managing or navigating the assignment, they then became concerned about the outcome. And we had to push back against that over the course of the term. Just let them know that if you're doing it, then you're doing it.
You're doing it.
that's
to
fine.
Be steady, sort of be a steady, and maybe part of that is the fact that the GSIs were doing the assessment, so it's the smaller group, a smaller sort of community feel about it.
I think that's true.
Anything for when you teach this again?
So I imagine all of us have ideas about this, about how to kind of create it, because there are capacity issues that you have to consider.
I wondered.
As you're in consultation with people, I think that one of the concerns that I had, which is just kind of endemic to campus, is the brutal nature of the schedule. And so we have a very long add drop period. And so in the beginning of a semester, you can't do too much around group work and project-based learning too early in the semester because there's just too much movement. At the same time, the end of semester crunch is really difficult for students, and having projects like this due towards finals week or towards the last week of classes can be really difficult and stressful for students. There's a kind of nice sweet spot between Halloween and Thanksgiving where it's like not too early and not too late, where you can do a lot, you can be more aggressive and more ambitious. But we even talked about that in terms of the assignments and kind of stack the assignments based on some of the schedule of the semester.
And I think we're also going to run into an issue with just like the finite capacity of special collections.
Right.
Like our library special collections in this time period are very limited. So I think at some point we'll have to start considering if we want to go to like Clements or other spaces on campus that have other resources that we could draw on. And also I think when we think about the library as this space where we store and we curate and we make available knowledge materials. Our online exhibits, we have to think about what kinds of materials are covered. So we have to think about the diversity of content, because I think this time period has a lot of coverage right now on our online exhibits. So we could start thinking about what the things that we learned in these particular assignments and whether we can adapt some of those different kinds of activities in the future.
So Jason, could you talk a little bit more, and Whitney as well, about this large course initiative, okay. I've participated for 2 years, I think, and it is a special format. It's produced some really terrific things and is a great, I think, incubator experience. I've seen people come out with very sort of bite-sized changes, an assignment or a technique for increasing participation. But I've also seen some sort of larger initiatives come out of that experience.
Yeah, it's designed to really meet the instructor where they are and to meet the needs as that instructor articulates them. So that could be small changes that happen gradually over time, perhaps in one semester, perhaps across 3 or 4, or it could be really sort of big changes to the course. It's all about what the instructor wants to do, how they want to pace the shifts. So I think that what you notice there, the diversity of changes that come about, the diversity of projects, reflects the fact that we're trying to meet people where they are with what they need, and leverage instructor motivation, right? We talk about that, not just student motivation in the course, but what's instructor motivation look like to take on the daunting task of teaching a large course and trying to use active learning and engage with students. So it's designed to meet people where they are and help instructors articulate their own goals around teaching.
I would just say for me that this sounds a little strange to say because university instructors spend all of their adult life in the classroom, first as students and then as instructors. And so they're in classrooms every day, but the classroom changes drastically over the course of time. And so every instructor has their own experience of having been a student under a certain idea about what pedagogy is supposed to look like and operating with certain theories that 10 or 15 or 20 years later are no longer the operable theories, and that changes drastically. And it's an odd sort of thing because you've been in the classroom as these changes are happening, but you haven't actually been experiencing them in the same way. And so for me, one of the strengths of the large course initiative was to actually put me in 1 week in particular, like actually literally put me back into a classroom. And so one of the things that the participants do is they go to class and they participate in class as a student. And it was earth-shattering, honestly, to think about how different that experience was as compared to my experience in a classroom. And one of the differences is just pretty plain. I went to a small liberal arts college. I've never walked into a large lecture course as a student. And the course that I visited during the LSI was a huge course, and it just struck me how active and loud and how mobile the classroom is. And there are screens in a classroom that take up a lot more space than had ever been the case when I was a student. And there's talking and movement. It's an incredibly daunting environment from the standpoint of the student, and that's something that the instructor is not going to know that because you just don't know what the class feels like from the 20th row.
Wow. I think from my years of participating, the one thing I loved was for various key topics, 2 or 3 key articles. So you don't have to go out there and and I always felt like those were great resources that I could use, and a really nice Canvas site for the organizing and for sharing, again, to have a little bit of the student experience from that standpoint as well, but just great resources.
Yeah, we work really hard, I think, to have to curate information, to curate sort of theoretical framework information, but also to have some clear takeaways from each session, and to be able to present those in a space where we get to talk about them together, so that it isn't just a resource page that someone goes, right? That's a big difference, I think, is the community piece, being able to talk to other instructors and think about how the same tool or strategy might look radically different in different classroom contexts, different disciplinary contexts. So I think that's actually a pretty important part of the learning community.
Good. Well, we thank you. They've been fun. So let's talk a little bit about the whole process of getting started with this course. Jason, I'm assuming emailed. Was it an email or a phone call way back when?
This is like April.
That's right. Yeah, we started. So the course was a fall course, and the initial conversation was about middle of spring semester of winter term.
Yeah,
around the middle of winter term, we started the conversation.
So I think Jason emailed me sometime in April or March, actually.
That's about right, yeah.
March or April. And this was just amazing. I was like, oh my God, we have an entire summer to plan this class. What a luxury. And it was great because I could have that initial conversation with Jason. At the time, I was the digital pedagogy librarian, so this was my job. And I was able to bring in Maura, our history librarian, and then our folks from special collections. And I think we also had conversations with someone from your unit who was working with clickers.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Anthony
right.
King with
That's
iClicker
right.
Cloud.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
So it was really great because we could think about all of these things. Special collections had already worked with another, I think 80-person English course, so they were also tweaking and refining some of their methods, so they could share also the example assignments that they had built out with this other faculty member, and then we could tweak it and make it appropriate for this class.
Nice.
And then we met early on in this prior to the start of the semester, so we could actually fine-tune the assignments. We could schedule spaces. And because special collections was coming in every week for 4 weeks with the recitation groups.
That's right.
So that was a lot of juggling of space and people and materials, because they were taking, primary materials from the 18th and 19th centuries and carting them all over the library for the students.
Wow.
So there was a lot just to coordinate.
The logistics were really pretty significant.
So it was really nice to have that amount of time to figure out all of those things. So when the semester is actually playing out, it doesn't seem as hectic as it otherwise would.
Right. And having the time then to connect all those different pieces and parts and give everybody a chance to think through the logistics. Yeah.
It's difficult too, because that's an incredible institutional intelligence that it takes, that instructors just frankly often don't have the institutional intelligence to know that for this particular item, that particular department is best. And so having help in navigating that part is really key. One of the things that I've noticed here is that people are willing to kind of extend invitations and information across departments in a way that in many cases only required me to talk to one person. When in fact there are 5 or 6 emails that follow my one question. I don't ever really see those 5 or 6 emails, but it's the institutional intelligence of the first person I'm talking to know that this needs to be coordinated across departments or what have you.
That's good to hear. We hope that happens, because that is something that I think we all have been involved in talking through in informal ways, and it was one of the primary motivators for me in really pulling us all together to look at this course, was that it's hard to do that, and it's hard for us even to know for each other, and I think we've run into situations where people who are maybe working with one group, their students will look for academic support from the library. They'll wander into Scholar Space. with an assignment. And so us thinking through how can we, mostly frankly through human means, how can we strengthen the knowledge that we have about what everybody's doing and who's got recording studios and who's got equipment and who's got consulting services, so that when when an instructor walks in and asks for a consultation with us, we can sort of be thinking big picture. Well, really, CRLT has a lot of expertise in this particular spot, and we can get you help with, because our organization has a lot of media equipment and media expertise in space. So that's really encouraging to hear that we're making progress, because it grows the pie. When we know more about who's doing what, we can make sure that an instructor it's not one-stop shopping, but maybe it's like 2 or 3 steps, as opposed to, in worst case scenario, that instructor it's one-stop shopping because they don't even find out about anybody else, right? So they manage to figure out how to, to get camera equipment for their students or how to put together an AVSA, but they never really learned about some of the other pieces that were options. And we have found, not particularly in this course, but particularly audiovisual essays often have a research component. So we're now able to, to pull people in or to help the instructor make connections over there, and it often is class visits and that sort of thing. We had somebody a year or so ago who wanted to change one assignment in their course so that students had a choice. They could do an audiovisual essay, but they could also they had a couple of other things, a website, but they had a comic. The instructor wanted the students to be able to do a comic strip. And I thought, well, we don't do comics here in ISS. But we knew that the library has this person, Brianna Ham, with incredible expertise. And so it's just turned into a situation where we feel like we're really making progress in that area.
It would be interesting to know from the standpoint of the instructors what best practices would look like from our end, because I was actually surprised with this class, because there were some things that I wanted to do that I was really concerned about capacity, and it just seemed like this might be a really heavy haul, and I don't want to pull in too many resources and kind of draw. But those things were really easy to do, and it was actually a small issue. Right. And there were other things that, to my mind, seemed rather small, but in consultation, you realize, no, that's actually a big problem, and we'll have to address how to manage capacity issues. So it's not always clear to instructors about. We don't always know what we're asking for when we're asking for something. Are we asking you to do something small, or are we asking you to do something big? And so some sense of like best practices for instructors would be great.
Right. How much lead time, is this? But I think, your point was, with this particular instance, you had a lot of lead time, so a lot of things were possible. But we've heard that from other people. That's really like, I don't know what I'm asking you. I don't know if I'm asking you for something that's very easy and reasonable, or something that's really going to be a stretch and a challenge. I agree.
I think just that willingness to ask those questions is really, really helpful. I think sometimes we hear from faculty that their perception of the library is that you go to it for a certain thing, and oftentimes it's not for pedagogy.
Interesting.
If it is, it's like instruction sessions about how to use our databases. So the fact that Jason came in and asked, like, what's possible, it was great for us, because this gave us a lot of freedom to think about how we as librarians can enter like a history class.
That really was the first question. It really was something like, so what's possible here? What can we do? It really did start open-ended, and it got to where it ended up. It was through those conversations, and
That makes me really happy. I don't know if you all remember, but that's actually how we start the first session of the LCI, right? Is we say, what's possible? We're just going to explore a range of things that might be possible for your course. And I think that disposition, starting a course redesign from that place, is incredibly powerful. It just opens you up to new resources and new people. And so I think that's absolutely a best practices. How open and flexible can an instructor be when they seek support and assistance on campus, which sometimes is less possible to be flexible if you know that you need to do a thing. But I think the more that could be in play, the more that can be done.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank each one of you, Anne and Mara and Jason and Whitney. We really appreciate you participating in this so that people can hear about your experience and think about ways that they might try something for their course. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.